Let's crochet the world's cutest stuffed bunny. Hey there, I'm Jess from Make a New Crew, and I'm going to show you how to make this bunny step by step. By the end of the video, you will have the most adorable little stuffie to gift or maybe even keep for yourself. And if you can't get enough of this long-legged look, make sure you subscribe because the rest of the Storybook collection is equally as cute and uses a lot of the same skills you'll build in this project. In this project, we are using Lion Brand's Feels Like Bliss yarn. And I know what you're thinking. This type of fuzzy yarn can be a little intimidating because it can be hard to see your stitches, but don't worry. I offer so many tips in this video, little tricks for keeping track of your stitch count. And if I'm honest, this yarn hides your mistakes so well that it doesn't even matter if you get everything exactly right. I'm going to be using a 5.5 size I crochet hook, but you should use whatever size hook you need to get nice tight stitches so that your stuffing doesn't pop through. You'll also need safety eyes. These are 10mm, about 20 inches of a yarn or embroidery floss color you like for the nose, several stitch markers, stuffing, and poly pellets if you want to add a little weight to your bunny. I'm going to be teaching you all the skills you need to crochet your bunny, but you'll also want to follow along with the written pattern, and that's linked below the video. So this step here you're going to do when you're making the head, the arms, the legs, and the ears, and we're going to begin with a magic circle. You can make your magic circle in however you prefer to do it. I like to start like this, wrap my yarn around, pull my loop through, and twist it. So now I've rotated it, I've got a little crisscross right here, and then I'm pulling my yarn through. That's what cinches it down. So that's just my method. You can do it however you have learned to do a magic ring, but that's how we're going to start the head, the ears, the legs, and the arms. And now we need to put 6 single crochets in our magic ring in order to create round 1. So I am putting 1 stitch in here, and then I like to immediately put a stitch marker right here, simply because this yarn is really hard to see our stitches in. So I'm going to place my stitch marker here. And we're going to move the stitch marker up with each round, but typically you wouldn't start like this, but with this yarn it's just really helpful to give ourselves a few clues. So that's my first single crochet. I want to put 6 total in here, so I've got 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And now we can tighten down our magic ring, magic circle. And because of our stitch marker, it's easier to see where we want to place our next stitch to begin round 2. So this is the same thing, whether you're working the head, the arms, the legs, the ears, we're going to do the same step for round 2. And because this is here, I can see a little bit more where I need to work my first stitch. I've got this 2 loops right here. That is the first stitch of this round 1, so I'm going to work into that for round 2. I'm going to pop my stitch marker out for just a second, place that first single crochet right there, and then I want to put my stitch marker back in. We're always going to put our stitch marker in the first stitch of each round. That's what's going to help us keep track of where the round begins. So that's my first stitch, and because we're going to increase in every stitch, that means we're putting 2 stitches in each of the stitches from round 1. So I've got 1 there. I'm going to work into the same stitch I just worked into and do another single crochet. So now we've got 2. And we're going to continue in that pattern, putting 2 stitches in each of these stitches from round 1. So that's 1 and 2. And I know you may be looking at this being like, how are you even seeing your stitches? It just looks like a pile of fluff. And that's true to some degree, but I want to promise you that you can, if you just kind of look at the frequency of this, it's pretty clear. I wouldn't skip over this here because it's just the next logical place my hook would go. So once you start to understand the pacing and the spacing of these, it gets easier. And then you can start to look for these 2 horizontal bars that represent our next stitch. So I want to put 2 single crochets in there and 2 in the next stitch. The good and bad thing about this yarn is that you really can't see very well what's going on. So that means that it's harder to see your stitches, but if you do make a mistake, it's also probably quite a bit harder to see it. So I really like to get the correct stitch count early on, but then if later on you realize you're off by 1 or 2 stitches, just course correct and you're really probably very likely to notice a difference or really be able to pick out that error in the end. So at this point, we should have 12 stitches. I've put 2 single crochet in each of my 6 single crochet from round 1. So I like to count them. Like I said, at this point, it's really helpful to get on the right track early on. So as I'm looking for my stitches here, I'm looking for a V that represents 1 stitch. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. This is where my stitch marker was, right there in the first stitch. It's a little bit like driving through a snowstorm or something. You have to just kind of relax your eyes and hope for the best. But like I said, this yarn's quite forgiving. So if you mess something up, it's also very unlikely you'll see it in the end. Okay, so now we're going to proceed with round 3. And this is where the shaping's going to differentiate a little depending on which body part you're making. So I am now going to explain the head, but once you make your head, you're gonna repeat the same process for the first 2 rounds of your arms, your legs, and your ears. And then further along in the video, I will show you how to proceed with round 3 of each of those body parts. All right, to continue with our head, we are going to work an increase in our first stitch, which means I'm going to remove my stitch marker temporarily and then put 2 stitches in my first stitch from round 2. So that's 1 and 2. And then I want to replace my stitch marker in the first stitch I created. So not the very one closest to my live loop, but the one right behind that, the first stitch I made. There we go. And now, again, we want to increase by 6 in this round, so we're going to increase every other stitch. So I just put 2 stitches in here for my first increase, and I'm going to single crochet in the next stitch. And then in the next one, I'm going to increase again, so 1 and 2. And then in the next one, 1 stitch, 2 in the next stitch. We're just alternating an increase with a single crochet right here, and then an increase. This is one of those scenarios where if you get out of order and you end up putting 2 increases next to each other and then you work 2 single crochets, it's very unlikely that you can see any mistake in the end in this yarn. So really what I would focus on is at the end of the round, just counting your stitches and making sure you have a total of 18. Round 4, we're going to begin by placing 1 stitch in the first 2 stitches. So we've got 1 in our first stitch, 1 in our second stitch, and then we're going to go back and place this in the first stitch I created. So not the one that's closest to the live loop, but the one right behind it. That's my first single crochet of this round. So I've worked those 2, and now we're going to increase. If you ever are like, do I put my stitch here? Do I put it here? That's likely to happen since this yarn is so fuzzy. What I like to do is lift my yarn up a little bit, and then I can see a little more clearly, okay, here's the hole that I worked into, and there's already a stitch in there. So now I know I can work into the next stitch, and that's where I'm going to put my increase. So I've done 2 single crochet now, and then an increase. I'm going to do 2 more single crochet, and an increase, 1 and 2, right into that same stitch. And then we're going to do 2 single crochet and an increase. We're going to continue like this around the round, doing 2 single crochets and then an increase, 2 single crochets and then an increase. And if you stay in that pattern, you should be ending the round with an increase. At the end of round 4, we want to have 24 stitches in that round. And this is a good point just to check the tension of your stitches. So this should feel fairly opaque. Like we should not be seeing many holes here. The fuzz really helps blur everything together. But like typical amigurumi, we don't want any spots where our stuffing can come out. So we want fairly tight stitches. If you're finding yours to be quite loose, I would try this set of rounds again with a smaller hook. Now we're going to move on to round 5. In round 5, we're going to once again pop the stitch marker out and start with an increase. So 2 stitches in the first stitch, 1 and 2. Replace my stitch marker right here in the first stitch I created. One away from my working loop here. And then we're going to work 3 single crochets. So 1, let's see where my stitch is here. It's not there. You can see right here, it's hard to see because my nail is poking through, but you can see I've already worked in that stitch. So then I know, all right, I got to move to the next stitch here. So I've worked my increase and then 1, 2, and 3 stitches. Again, I'm going to increase 2 stitches in the same stitch and then 1, 2, and 3 single crochets, and then 2 stitches in the next stitch. Again, we're really not looking for perfection in our increasing here. We're just trying to get to the right number of stitches at the end of the round. So we're working in that pattern of an increase and then 3 single crochets, and we're gonna repeat that all the way around round 5, and we should be ending with a single crochet in this round. At the end of round 5, we should have 30 stitches. Again, it doesn't really matter how you got there. It's more important that you've got 30, and we'll move on to round 6, where now we're gonna work 4 single crochets. So I'm gonna remove that stitch marker, work 1, 2 stitches, maybe 3. I just like to kind of get out of that place where I need to place my stitch marker and then go back 1, 2, 3 stitches, put my stitch marker back in the first stitch of that round. And then I need 1 more. You can see I worked my last stitch right here. I'm just pointing this out because I know how hard it can be to see. So when I pull this open a little, I can see, all right, I've got my hole that I just worked into, and I can see there's a stitch above it. Therefore, my next hole is my next stitch. So it's right next door. It can be a little, you could really easily think it would go right there, but then I'd be placing another stitch in the same place as before. So I find it easier to not get interrupted mid-round when I'm working with this fuzzy yarn, but if you do, you can always pull it up like this just to look for where's the next available hole, since I've already used this one. So that's right here where my needle is. I've worked 1, 2, 3 single crochets. So now I'm going to put a 4th one in the next stitch. And now we're ready to increase. So that's 1 and 2 in the same stitch. Now 4 single crochets, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then in our next stitch, we're going to increase again. So we're going to continue like this, 4 single crochets and then an increase around this circle. And we're going to end the circle with an increase. At the end of round 6, we have 36 stitches here, and now we're going to do 1 more round of increasing with round 7. I'm going to begin with my increase right away, so 1 and 2 stitches right there in my first stitch, and move my stitch marker to the first stitch I created. And now I'm going to work single crochet over the next 5 stitches. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then I'm going to increase again, 1 and 2, and then 5 more single crochets. We're going to continue in that pattern, working an increase followed by 5 single crochets, ending this round with the 5 single crochets. And at the end of round 7, you should have 42 stitches going around. So we are done increasing now, which means it's a little easier to keep track of things. What I like to do at this point is place a second stitch marker that's a different color than my first stitch marker. I'm just going to put this in round 7 somewhere. And the reason I do this with this fuzzy yarn is because it can be hard to count your rounds after a little while. You can kind of see them, but I like to give myself as many clues as possible. So I'm going to put this here in round 7, and then later when I'm going back and thinking about where I want to place the eyes and things like that, I can just be certain, all right, this stitch marker is in round 7, so then I really only need to count the rounds from there. It's just another little clue to help find my way in this fuzzy yarn. So now we're going to keep our first stitch marker in. We're going to keep moving that up as we start each new round. So I always like to work about 3 stitches like this just to kind of get out of the way of the stitch marker, and then go back, place it in the first stitch of my round right there, 3 stitches back, Now we're just going to single crochet in each stitch, and we're going to do this for several rounds. 11 more rounds to be exact. So we're going to just be working around in these spiral rounds of single crochet until we finish round 18. And as I'm doing this, I'm going to leave my stitch marker in round 7. That one's not moving, but my first stitch marker is going to get moved up. Each time I start a new round, I'm going to place that stitch marker in the first stitch of the round. So we can walk away now, complete our next 11 rounds of single crochet, and then we'll meet back here and talk about decreasing the head. And once those rounds of single crochet are done, you should have something that looks like this. I've got 18 total rounds here, and it's time to mark the placement of our safety eyes. So if you remember, we put our stitch marker in round 7, so that makes it a little easier to count enough rounds, and I am placing my eyes between rounds 13 and 14. So I'm got my little marker here right in a kind of a ditch between 2 rows. I'm placing it there. I'm placing this one here, and that's going to result in a bunny that looks like this. So this one, the eyes are placed between rounds 13 and 14, and there's 10 stitches between the eyes right here, 10 visible stitches. So looking from the inner side of the eye to the other inner side, 10 stitches. But I also realize it can be really hard to count these. So assuming you're using the same yarn as me, and therefore your gauge is about the same, it's just over 2 inches from the inner eye to the other inner eye, like 2 1/8. So that's another way to gauge the distance between your eyes if you like the look of this. So I'm using these needles here to mark the placement of the eyes on this bunny. I got one there. These are 10mm eyes. Of course, you can use something different if you want. Let's check the measurement of this one, see how we're liking it. Looks like it is a little bit closer together than on the other bunny, so I'm going to move it over by 1 stitch, like that. Check that distance. Yep, that looks about right. I maybe just counted my stitches wrong, given that these are pretty tricky. So now I'm going to pop these backs on the safety eyes. And I like to wait a little while to embroider the nose on, just to watch the head shape sort of form before I do the nose. So now we're going to do some additional rounds in the head, and we're going to decrease through these to form more of a ball shape. I've still got that stitch marker indicating my first stitch of the round, so I'm going to work a decrease here, and we're doing invisible decreases as we go in the head. So that looks like working under the front loop of the first stitch and then the front loop of the next stitch. We're going to combine those two into 1 stitch. That's how we're decreasing. And I find it really hard in this yarn to see the 3rd stitch then. The first one we're just going to work regularly into. And so I like to put a needle right there, especially as I'm just getting used to this yarn. I insert it right here, and that marks the stitch that I'm going to work my next stitch into. So this is my invisible decrease. I just pulled my yarn through those 2 loops I picked up, and then I complete my single crochet. So that was a lot going on. I will show you again, but I'm going to put my stitch marker in the top of that stitch because that decrease is representing our first stitch of this round. And now I've got this needle showing me where I'm going to put my hook next. So I'm going to pop it in there and work 5 total single crochets. So that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, now we're ready to decrease again. So that is picking up the front loop of my first stitch, picking up the front loop of my next stitch, placing the needle there to mark my next one. And the only reason I do that is it's really hard for me to see where to insert my hook. I just find it really hard in this yarn. So I mark myself like that, and it just helps me move a little faster. So I pull my yarn up like that through those first 2 loops, and then yarn over to complete our single crochet, and that forms our decrease. And then we know we've got this right here is where we're going to put our next stitch. So that's 1, and then 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then we're going to decrease again, pick up the front loop of our first stitch, the front loop of our next stitch, and then we know the next loop there is the next stitch we're going to single crochet into. So I've got that marked, and then pull my yarn through those 2 loops and yarn over and complete my single crochet. So there's another decrease, and then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we're repeating this process 6 times around. So as you can see here, we're doing a decrease and then single crocheting 5, decrease, single crocheting 5. So that decrease, one more time, front loop, next stitch, front loop, pick it up. I like to put my needle there just so I know where I'm inserting my hook, yarn over, and then complete your single crochet. There's our decrease, and then we're gonna do 5 more single crochets. And from there, you're just gonna repeat that a couple more times to finish up this round. So at this point, we should have eliminated 6 stitches, and at the end of round 19, we should have 36 total stitches. Now in round 20, we're gonna do a very similar thing. We're just gonna start with our single crochets first and then do the decrease. So you'll see in rounds 19 through 22, we are alternating whether we single crochet first or decrease first, and that just creates the most round ball. We're just kind of spreading out our decreases. But the concept is exactly the same, and the number of single crochets we work between the decreases will be 1 fewer for each round. So in round 19, we obviously worked 5 single crochets. In round 20, we're gonna do 4 single crochets. 21, we're gonna do 3 single crochets. In round 22, we're gonna do 2 single crochets. So the concept is exactly the same. It's quite easy pattern reading. So I'm going to step aside and let you do those steps because the skills we've already covered here. So in round 20, we're going to single crochet in the next 4 and then do our invisible decrease and then single crochet in the next 4, do our invisible decrease, single crochet in the next 4, and at the end of that round you should have 30 total stitches. Again, if you realize, oh shoot, I only have 29, something like that, then in the next round just skip one of your decreases. It's fine. We're just going for the broad strokes here to taper this head in, but your bunny head is not going to look any different if you mess up the stitch count by 1 or 2. All right, so let's go ahead and work rounds 19 through 22, doing our decrease, and when we meet back here, we should have a little bit more of a rounded ball head. And at the end of round 22, we've got a little bit of a globe going here, and I've placed a needle right in the middle of my eyes along round 15. This is where our nose is gonna go. So if you remember right here, we had round 13 and round 14. We stuck our safety eyes between there. So this is 14. Here's 15. We're gonna put our nose right over round 15. So if you look at this example bunny here, this is round 15. Of course, you can do this however you want, and I find this process very stressful. So if you're like me, you're probably gonna do it a few times and tear it out until you get the exact bunny face that you want. But the general idea is to work a small upside down triangle in the center of the eyes along round 15. Now I've got a strand of brown worsted weight yarn threaded on my tapestry needle. This happens to be color theory yarn, but you can use whatever you have that is about worsted weight and a nice complementary color to your face. And I'm going to attempt this with my yarn single stranded. So I didn't tie a knot to make 2 strands. Instead, I tied a big knot right here that won't slip through my stitches. And I'm gonna use a single strand because I find that that just gives me a little bit more control. And then I'm going to attempt to get my needle to go right out where I've got my placeholder here. And then we're just gonna cross our fingers. Really, I mean it. This part is stressful for me. I can't be alone in that. Leave me a comment down below if you find embroidering the face, placing the safety eyes, and sewing the limbs on just the absolute most stressful part. The good news is that most of it can be redone if it doesn't work out, but man, it's just hard to know how it's gonna look until you just finish it up and then decide, is it a do-over or a keep? So I'm just doing these little whip stitches here, and I'm aiming them all toward a point at the bottom of the nose and then fanning out into a triangle here. And somehow, on the very first try, I got a shape of nose that I really like, but I don't love the color. I'm just not quite sure of it. So I actually used a different color of yarn and embroidered a backup nose on the other side just to test the color out. And I think I like this one better. So this just happens to be a little bit of this Made with Love yarn. It's from Lion brand. So if you happen to have this yarn on hand, great. It's kind of a mauve-y color. But if not, just anything this color is what I'm using with my pink bunny. But of course, you just use whatever scraps you have on hand and whatever color it matches the yarn that you're using. So now I'm just going to remove my little tester nose on the back of the head and remove my brown nose and embroider a new nose on the front using my mauve yarn. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. It is not perfect, but it is perfectly imperfect for a handmade bunny. And I just need to tie off my yarn. So I'm gonna just go in here and make sure I pick up a couple strands of nose yarn and then pull my yarn through. And I wanna get that little tail that is part of my yarn strand. So I wanna create a loop like this and then just stick my needle through it so I can tie essentially like a sewing knot. My grandma taught me how to do this when we learned how to hand quilt. So I've done a lot of those, and this is one way that I just like to facet off my yarn, especially if it's not going to be seen because it's inside the project. So this is all twisted up. But the idea is to create a loop, go through it, and if you're feeling kind of adventurous, you have a second loop there. After you've done that, you can even go back through that and then fasten it down. So you just want to do that a few times to get this tied off really well, and then you can cut your yarn and, man, give yourself a high five for finishing one cute little nose. And next we're going to stuff the head. I don't like to put any weight in the head just because I feel like it makes the bunny just a little extra floppy in a way it doesn't really need to be. So I'm just gonna put some stuffing in the head here. The yarn, as you'll notice, if you're using this Feels Like Bliss yarn, it's a little bit structured as long as your gauge is really tight. So I don't find the need to overstuff it, especially because I want this to be cute and floppy. But I want to give this enough structure with the stuffing that even when it gets loved a lot, it's not fully compressed. So that looks about good. When yours is stuffed, we're ready to proceed with the last couple of rounds to finish off our head. It doesn't matter where your face is on this round either. Mine just happens to be right above my stitch marker for beginning and ending the round. Yours may not be like that. That is totally fine. We're going to begin round 23 with a decrease just like we have been. So I'm picking up my first loop, picking up the front loop of my next stitch. I can place this in here. By now you might be so good at decreasing then that you don't need this little marker, but I'm just helping sort of demonstrate on camera, because if it's hard for me to see in real life, it's even harder to see in fuzzy yarn on camera. So we've got one decrease. Then next we're going to single crochet in the next stitch. We're going to repeat that around. So we've got a decrease, front loop, the next stitch. Here is my next stitch. Complete our decrease and then single crochet. So you're going to do this a total of 6 times, where you do a decrease, single crochet in the next stitch, decrease, single crochet in the next stitch. And then at the end of round 23, there should be a total of only 12 little stitches in your head. Oh my goodness, did you catch that? I forgot to put my stitch marker back in my first decrease there. But luckily I was counting as I went, so I know that I have completed 6 repeats. Now you should just have a little hole like this, so we're gonna finish it off by working decreases all the way around. So that's just every 2 stitches you're gonna decrease. So we've got 1, and next stitch, another decrease. This is not really make or break it, because this part of the head is not going to be visible once we sew it onto the body. So you're just going for like not a bunchy, weird sort of neck, but other than that, we're just trying to decrease in order to close this up. So perfection is not the name of the game here. but closing this up is. So we're gonna decrease 6 times. You should have a total of 6 stitches left. It doesn't really matter because you just are gonna have a little hole like this, and we're gonna use this for pulling the head in for our ears a little bit. So it's okay that you've got this little hole. You can leave it open for now, but you do want to fasten off this yarn. I like to leave a pretty long yarn tail, maybe 20 inches, just in case you wanna use this for seaming your head to the body. You'll have another opportunity to leave a yarn tail when you finish the body, but it's always friendly to leave yourself a yarn tail just in case you need it later. Now we're going to do something to shape the head a little bit. We're going to indent where we want the ears to be attached. So we want to keep this stitch marker in for a minute because it's going to help us understand where to place this indentation. And then the end effect is going to be bringing the head in just a little bit here, and that's where we're going to attach these cute ears. So if you remember, this stitch marker is placed in round 7, and round 7 is the same place we want to indent our ears. We just want to do it over here on the sides. So your stitch marker likely does not indicate where the ear should go, but it does tell you which round is round 7. And in this fuzzy yarn, that helps us follow the little bit of a path we can see around like this to where we might want the ear, and then around like this to where we might want the ear over here. So actually, this is more just to show you kind of an equator around your bunny's head to mark the 7th round down on this side and the 7th round down on this side. And the placement that I prefer is sort of in the middle of the head, but just a little bit toward the face. So if you look here, my ears are right above where I put that indentation. And so the indentation is just a little bit forward on the head, not quite exactly on the side, slightly forward, but we're going to do the indentation over round 7. So then on this head, I'm going to follow my round 7 that's marked right over here so that I'm not quite in the center, little bit forward, still in round 7. And then I'm going to mark where I want my indentation to go. Obviously, you'll have a chance to check this out with your stitch markers before you make any final decisions. That's the beauty of using stitch markers. So I think I'm going to aim for right there. Now I'm going to use the stitch marker, but I'm going to follow round 7 around like this till I get again over on this side, slightly forward. I'm going to place this in round 7 and just see if I like the look. The main idea here is we're going to be pulling the head in this spot where our stitch marker is. So you can kind of indent it and see if you like how that's looking. Well, it looks pretty good to me, and it looks like, just like I showed you on the green bunny, it's kind of in the middle of the head, but slightly toward the face. So I think that'll be a good placement for my ears. So I think this is good enough for me. Definitely don't hesitate to play around a little bit though, because even if you do your indentation, you don't like it, it's pretty easy to take out. This has a big impact on how the face looks, so it's worth getting right. All right, I've got a strand of yarn threaded on my tapestry needle, and it's worth mentioning that if you're not using fuzzy yarn, this step is going to be a little bit visible. So what we're doing is we're doing a long stitch across right here to pull the head in. But if you're not using fuzzy yarn, you're going to be able to see that strand of yarn. It will be tucked under the ear, so it might be just fine with you, but I don't want to lead you astray and you don't realize what you're in for. So that's just one thing to be noted. If your yarn is fuzzy like mine though, this is just going to disappear. And to do this, we're going to go through the opening of the head, right here, the neck. Mine is quite tiny at this point. And we want to bring our needle up to the stitch marker and try to pop it out right there around round 7, even above it a little bit, like between 6 and 7 is totally fine. And then we're going to cover somewhere around 5 stitches. This is not a precise action. We're just trying to pull this head in a little bit. So I'm going to thread my yarn through like this. I'm keeping the yarn tail down here because we're going to pull on it. But I want to skip over somewhere around 5 stitches like this, and then go back out the bottom, not through the same exact center hole though, more like through somewhere in round 1 or 2. So now we can pull on these 2 strands. They're connected. My tapestry needle is still on here, but what I can do is kind of yank on this and watch how it manipulates the head. So if that is too far in for you, you just loosen the pull. You can see this is my strand right here. So I can kind of go from just a little bit of impact to more and more and more and more, maybe to when the head is a little too squished down. You're just gonna play around with this, and I would suggest doing it on both sides before you tie your yarn in any way, because it's kind of nice to see the symmetry before you commit to anything. So I'm just going to unthread my needle and repeat the same process on the second side. One thing to note with this Feels Like Bliss yarn is that it's almost crocheted. It's got a bit of a chainette texture. So when you cut it and you pull on it, it can start to essentially like unravel. So what I've found is if I can pull a little loop out from it and then pull that unraveling tail through it, it kind of fastens off the yarn like that and prevents it from unraveling further. So now I have this strand, it's still sturdy, but it's a little bit unraveled. And then this is the thickness of my normal yarn. So I'm gonna use this strand to repeat this step on the second side. This head shaping technique is one I learned from Steph of All About Ami. And it's just so cool because you don't have to do as much shaping in the crochet stitches because you can do this simple trick instead. So now I've got both sides complete and I am liking the shaping I've got there. You can just pull on these tails to kind of make sure you like the head shape and make sure it looks pretty even to you. And then you can actually, I mean, you could weave in these yarn tails, but my approach is just to tie them in a knot, a really secure knot, because we're gonna attach the body here and that's gonna hide everything we've got under the head. So I'm just going to tie these a few times, make sure all these tails are really secure. I'm gonna do a square knot here, a few different ways. Really wanna make sure that if this is washed and really well loved, it doesn't unravel. But I'm gonna do a bunch of these and then leave just a little bit of yarn tail hanging out so that they're less likely to unravel. And then eventually we'll tuck those tails inside the body, the top of the body opening as we're joining the head to the body. All right, that seems pretty sturdy there. So now I'm going to cut these off. What a cute little head. All right, let's talk about making some cute little ears. So in this case, we've got our first 2 rounds established just as we're doing for every other body part. So I've got 6 single crochets and then in round 2, an increase in each. So we've got 12 stitches here. And in round 3, we're gonna start off by increasing immediately. So 1 and 2 stitches right away in my first stitch. I'm gonna place my stitch marker in the first stitch I created. And now we're going to work 5 single crochets. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can tell even I'm pausing sometimes. I've worked with this yarn a lot at this one. I'm pausing to see where my stitches are. I find the bright lights that I'm filming under really helpful. So if you're struggling to see your stitches, going by a window or having a nice lamp on can also be helpful. I've done those 5 single crochets now, and then I've got an increase in my next stitch. So 1, 2 stitches in my next single crochet, and then we should have 5 stitches left to single crochet into. So that should have increased our stitch count from 12 in round 2 to 14 in round 3. Go ahead, count your stitches. It's always worth getting them right in each round, even if that means you have to do 1 extra increase at the end of the round or something like that. You just want the stitch count to be correct. Round 4, we're going to increase 2 total stitches again. So I want to single crochet into the first 6 stitches of the round. So that's 1 and 2, replace my stitch marker there, and then I want to do 4 more single crochets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then when I have 6 single crochets there, we're going to increase, so 2 stitches in the next stitch, so our increase, and then we're going to work 6 single crochets again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can see, even I am just looking for my stitches here. Sometimes I fumble around, even though I've worked with this yarn a lot. It's just the nature of this fuzzy beast. So in my last stitch of this round, I want to increase again. So that should be 2 total increases we've done in this round, which should put you at the end of round 4 at 16 total stitches. Round 5, we're going to begin with an increase right away. 1, 2, and then we want to do 7 single crochets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And we're going to repeat that one more time. So we've got an increase in the next stitch, and then 7 more single crochets to end this round. At the end of round 5, we've got 18 total stitches, and we're ready to work a couple rounds in just single crochet. So like I mentioned before, because the rounds are hard to count also, I like to just put a stitch marker in to tell myself, all right, this is round 5. It's just like a little sticky note to remind me. I've placed a stitch marker here in round 5, and now I need to work a total of 4 rounds in single crochet. So this is just going to make it a little easier because I'll know I don't have to figure out how many rounds this is. I know my stitch markers in round 5. Now I'm going to work 4 rounds in single crochet only, and I'm just going to keep moving this first stitch marker up, replacing it in my first stitch of the round as I go. And now, because of this little sticky note we left ourselves here that indicates round 5, it's a little easier for me to count how many rounds of single crochet I've done. So I can see this is 5, so 6, 7, 8, and 9. You can kind of see those little divisions there. So I know I've finished my rounds of single crochet, and in round 10, we're gonna start with an invisible decrease. So I wanna remove this, and our invisible decrease, just like we did in the head, we're gonna work under only the front loops of the next 2 stitches. And I find, as I mentioned before, that it's really hard for me to identify the next stitch after that. So I like to put my thumbnail right there to mark my next stitch for myself, just so that I'm not lost in a sea of fuzz. So I'm going under that first loop, under the loop of the next stitch, 1 and 2, and then I'm gonna yarn over and pull it up. And now I'm ready to complete that decrease. So that's going to be my first stitch, and because I've got my thumbnail here, I know, all right, I'm going to move right into that next stitch to work my regular single crochet. That's just how I like to handle it with fuzzy yarn. If this wasn't fuzzy, I don't think I would need to do that because I'd really clearly be able to see where my next stitch is. So in order to mark my first stitch of the round, it's going to be not the one closest to my live loop, it's the next stitch back here. That was our decrease where we took 2 stitches and turned them into 1. So I've got that marked. Now I've got 1 single crochet, and we want a total of 7 single crochets now. So I've got 1 there, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Okay, so we've got 7 single crochets worked. We're ready to do our next decrease. So that's over the next 2 stitches. 1 here, pointed out right here with my needle so we can really see. We've got this stitch and this stitch are going to be our 2 stitches we're going to merge in our decrease, and then this is the stitch that I'm going to put my next single crochet in. So we'll work under this first loop, this next loop of my next stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop, and then complete that single crochet. So that was my decrease. Now I know my next stitch is right here, and we're going to put a single crochet in there. So that's 1. We should have 6 more after that. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 7. So what we've got now is a decrease, 7 single crochets, another decrease, and then another 7 single crochets. So now we've reduced our total stitch count. We should have 16 stitches at the end of round 10. In round 11, we're going to start with 6 single crochets. 1, see, I already worked in there. 2, 3. I'm gonna put my stitch marker back in my first stitch, and then 4, 5, 6. Now we're ready for a decrease. So again, I've got my first stitch to decrease in, second one, and then this is where my next stitch is gonna go. So I'm just gonna mark it for myself so I don't lose it. I can also do that with my thumbnail, but for the sake of the camera, I'll use my needle. We've got first stitch, I picked up my front loop, second stitch, I picked up my front loop. Now I can yarn over and pull up a loop, and now I'm gonna complete my single crochet there. That was my decrease, and now I know right where my needle was is where my next single crochet is gonna go. And then we want to work 6 single crochets total before we reach our last decrease of the round. So I've got 2 stitches left here. I'm gonna pick up the front loop of each of those, yarn over, pull up, and then complete that invisible decrease. So now we've decreased twice in this round. At the end of round 11, you should have a total of 14 stitches. And we want to do something here to preserve this tail from our magic ring so that we can use it later to tack our ear down into a flat shape. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just going to insert my hook and grab this right here. This is the tail. And I'm gonna pull it out like this. And this tail is later, we're gonna use it to kind of like sew back and forth just to flatten our ear. So we just want it out right now because it's gonna get harder as our ear gets taller. So I'm gonna leave that out and proceed with round 12, in which we're just going to single crochet in each stitch. So that is quite straightforward at this point. We're just gonna go around, place your stitch marker back in your first stitch, and work 14 single crochets. Round 13, we're going to decrease again. So we're gonna start the round with a decrease. Again, I've got my first stitch here, second stitch, and so my third stitch, I'm just gonna put that right there to mark it. We've got 1 and 2 front loops. Pull up your yarn and complete your single crochet. So now that's our decrease. It's also the first stitch of this round. And we want to work 5 more single crochets here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And now it's time to decrease again. So we've got 1, 2, and 3. I'm gonna put my needle right there to hold the spot. 1, 2. That completes our decrease. And now we should have 5 more single crochets to work into. 2, 3, 4, and 5. All right, at the end of that round, we now should have 12 stitches, and we're ready to do a bunch of rounds of just straight up single crochet now. And now we're gonna take that stitch marker out of round 5. We don't need it there anymore, but we do wanna move it up to the round we just worked. So this is round 13. We're gonna place our sticky note right there to remind ourselves where this is, just so we don't have to do as much counting in our fuzzy yarn. And now we're gonna work a bunch of rounds of single crochet. So that's why we're placing this here. This represents round 13, and we're gonna do 6 more rounds just in straight up single crochet in a spiral. So that in your pattern is rounds 14 through 19. We're just gonna single crochet, and then we'll meet back here and talk about how to do the final shaping for the ear. And at the end of those rounds, you should have something that looks like this. If I double check my work by counting from my stitch marker, we know this was round 13. So then we're looking for those little lines here. We've got 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19. I also encourage you to keep a little tally mark or cross them off in the pattern as you go, but I often forget to do that. So I like to be able to count my rows as well, which is not the easiest in this yarn, but hopefully you can see between your sticky note here of your stitch marker and then being able to slightly see your rows, you can kind of get an idea of what you're doing. All right, so now we're going to decrease once more, and that is going to just look like decreasing right away in 1 and 2. This time I'll use my thumb to mark my next stitch so I know where I'm headed after this decrease. We've got 1, and then that's where I'm going to put my next stitch right there. So that just accomplished my first decrease and then my first single crochet. So I want to do 4 total single crochets. So we've got 1 already, and then 2, 3, and 4. I'm just going to double check that. Here's my decrease, and then 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, now we're going to decrease again the next 2 stitches. 1, 2. Place my thumb so that I know where to put my hook after I'm done with this. We've got that decrease right there. And my stitch marker fell out, and that's that process. So that's what I get for flying fast and loose and not tightening that up each time. So what I'm gonna do from here, I know I just worked a decrease and then placed 1 single crochet. So I need to do a total of 4. So if I put 3 more single crochets here, in theory, I should end up at the end of my round, and I can double check that. So 2 and 3. And then I want to look at my next stitch and make sure it looks like I did a decrease. And to my eye, it does look like a decrease. So I'm going to put my stitch marker in here and then go ahead and count my stitches. It's not the end of the world if you lose the beginning of the round. Like in this yarn, it's never going to show up. I'm kind of just showing you how I handle this on the fly. But really, if that happens to you, don't sweat it too much. So now we've decreased as far as we're going to. We should have 10 stitches in this round, and we're going to work few more rounds of just straight up single crochet. So once again, I'm going to move this little sticky note up here to my most recent round. That is round 20. And once again, we're going to work 6 rounds in straight up single crochet. So knowing that I've placed this silver stitch marker there in round 20 is going to help me count later on if I lose track of my rounds. But in the meantime, I'm just going to put a single crochet in each stitch, move my marker up as I go, and complete 6 rounds of single crochet. And at the end of our rounds of single crochet, the way I can check that is to know that this marker was placed in round 20. So I've got 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, and 26 rounds. So once again, if you end up with 1 round fewer or more, is totally fine. What I would do is you make your second ears, just check them next to each other, make sure they're the same length. And now we are ready to fasten off. I like to leave myself a nice long yarn tail here because I can use this for seaming the ear to the head. I'm just gonna pull this out right here. And then we wanna use this yarn tail that was from our magic ring to just kind of flatten this ear out. So it really doesn't matter what way you do this. I would squish your ear around a little and try to identify if you can see where those decreases were and one side of this looks flatter or it kind of lends itself to being flattened, I would go with that. But really there's not a wrong way to do this. We're just trying to make it look less like a tube. So now I'm going to thread my tapestry needle with my magic ring tail. Now that I've got my ear kind of flattened out, my goal here is just to take a few little stitches to press the ear together. And this won't work quite as well if you're not using fuzzy yarn. So if you are using more of a regular yarn that doesn't have all of this fuzz on it, then my suggestion would be to do the same thing, but really try to make your stitches small and invisible so that you're kind of tucking this together, but your yarn isn't showing up. So I'm gonna just do another stitch here, and I'm just trying to put essentially like some little staples. I don't want big stitches that are visible, so I'm going through like this. And then once I get it through and I need to move my yarn somewhere else, I'll insert it around the same hole. I'm going to move it up here to do another little staple-ish thing right here more in the middle. And then I'm going to do that a couple more times. You don't actually have to be sewing in and out up the whole ear. Like you can carry your yarn right here up through your tube and then do maybe one more little tacky down staple type of stitch like this. We're not pulling them too tight. We don't want them to be visible. We just want our ear to be semi-flat. So once I've done a few of those, now we want to weave in this yarn tail in the middle of our ear. So because my yarn is dense and fuzzy, I really can just put my needle right here through the middle. You can't see, but I'm kind of pushing it through these stitches on the inside, and then I'm just going to weave it in and out. As long as it has some good friction on it and I go back and forth a few times, it should be safely tucked inside. So our ear is not going to have any stuffing in it. We're just going to leave it like this to be its cute little flat self. And once I have this yarn tail woven in, I can cut it off. Just like that. Now we have one ear complete, so we can take out the stitch marker. We're going to leave this long yarn tail in order to use it for seaming onto the head, but you can repeat those same steps to make a second ear. Now let's talk about our arms. So we're gonna obviously make 2 of these, and we're getting them started the same way we did the head. So I've got my first round of 6 single crochets, my second round of 2 stitches in each stitch, so that's a total of 6 increases. At this point we should have 12 stitches in round 2, and we're ready to move on to round 3, which is a little unique for the arms specifically. A lot of these skills translate, but it's just the rate of increasing is going to be a little different in this arm section. So I've got my first stitch marked. I am going to take that out and work an increase right away to start round 3. 1 and 2 stitches in that first stitch. Place my stitch marker back into the first stitch of the round. And now we're going to single crochet in the next 5 stitches. So 1, 2, gotta look for those stitches. 3, 4, and 5. So that should take us about halfway around our circle. We're going to increase one more time. So in the next stitch, we want to put 2 single crochets, 1 and 2, and that should leave us with 5 stitches left to single crochet and 2. 1, 2, 3. Already worked in there. Okay. 4 and 5. Just like I mentioned with the head, it's not so important how you get to the right stitch count. If you're off in your placement of 1 increase or something like that, it's really not going to make a difference. The yarn will hide it for you. We just want to get to the same stitch count so that both of our arms have 14 stitches around in round 3, and that's going to make them the same circumference and just look even on our animal. So now we've got these 14 stitches, and we are going to continue working in rounds for quite a while now. We're not going to increase anymore. We just want to have these skinny little arms. So to begin that, I am going to place my stitch in my first stitch that was marked there. I'm going to work 3, as I like to do, to get out of the way of my stitch marker, and then I like to then just count back 1, 2, 3. That was my first stitch of the round. I know it sounds a little silly that we're going to keep putting our stitch marker back in every 14 stitches, but that is how we're going to be able to know where our round begins and ends. So I'm now just single crocheting in each stitch. I'm going to continue like this until I have a total of 24 rounds in the arm. So we are just going to cruise around in a lot more rounds of single crochet like this until we have about 24 rounds. I'm going to take my stitch marker out here, work my first single crochet in there, 1, 2, and 3. You don't have to always work 3 to start your round. I just like to do that because it makes it easier for me to put the stitch marker in and then not run into it as I'm continuing to stitch. So from here, it's just single crochet, spiraling up, 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 up until we have about 6 1/4 inches of an arm. And then when you've got 25 rounds complete, or you think you do, I know it can be so hard to count these. So I do suggest looking at this and counting. You can kind of see that divot between each row. So I like to count them. But another way to double check your work, if you're using the same yarn as I am, which is Lion Brand's Feels Like Bliss, then we can measure our arm. Just make sure it's around 6 inches. That's what we're going for. So if you're using a different weight of yarn, your arm is is going to be a different length. But if this is the weight yarn you're using, then 6 inches or a little longer is just fine, and then you'll know you have about 25 rounds. So from here, we're going to leave a long yarn tail, maybe 20 inches or so, just to be really safe, and fasten this off, and then go ahead and do the exact same steps to make a second arm. For our legs, we're going to get started in the same way we did our head and arms. So we've got 6 single crochet in our magic ring, and then an increase in each stitch for round 2. So I've got 12 total stitches here. And for round 3, I'm going to place an increase in my first stitch. Right there, 1 and 2 single crochets. Put my stitch marker back into that first stitch right there. And then I'm going to put 2 single crochets here. Just stitches, not increases. So we've got 1, and then in the next stitch, another 1. And then we're going to repeat that pattern. So an increase in my next stitch, 1 and 2 stitches in that same stitch, and then now 2 single crochets. 1 in one stitch, 1 in the next stitch. And we're going to repeat that 2 more times. So 4 increases total in this round. I've got 1, 2 stitches right there to increase, and then a single crochet, another solo single crochet, and then an increase, 1, 2. And I should have 2 stitches left here, 2 single crochet, 2, 1 and 2. Great. Now when we count our stitches at the end of round 3, we should have a total of 16. So just like we did in the arms, we're going to work in a spiral, single crocheting in each stitch now for a lot more rounds. So I'm going to just keep moving this stitch marker up as I work, single crocheting in each stitch. We're going to do this for a while now. Our legs are just a little bit longer than our arms, so we're going to work a few more rounds just in single crochet stitches just like this. We want to work until we have a total of 35 rounds in the entire leg. So of course, if you're using fuzzy yarn like this, it can be a little tricky to count these. And another way you can double check, assuming you're using a thickness of yarn like Feels Like Bliss, we can measure our leg and it should be right at about 8 inches. So if you just want to double check against your number of rounds, you want a leg that's 8 inches. Of course, if you're using a different weight yarn, your leg may be shorter or longer. But if you're using Feels Like Bliss, we're aiming for about 8 inches. And when our first leg is done like this, we're just going to fasten off because we don't need this yarn anymore. And then we're going to go ahead and repeat the exact same steps to make a second leg. And once again, I would measure these, make sure they're the same length. That's really more important than anything else if you want an even looking animal. But when you have that second leg done, we're going to keep this yarn attached. Our second leg, we're going to continue working with this yarn as we move into the body. But first we need to stuff our legs and add poly pellets for weight if you want. I like to add a little weight in my legs because I think it makes everything a little floppier and even cuter. So I have a sewn together nylon here, a pair of tights that I cut, sewed a little pouch, and put 2 tablespoons of poly pellets in here. You can do this however you want. This is just one way I like to do it. And then I'm going to push it down into the bottom of my leg. Sometimes I use a chopstick or my hook for this. And then when that's toward the bottom of the foot, I don't want it way too pressed down in there. I kind of want the pellets to be able to move around. Then I am going to stuff this leg. Again, I like to avoid overstuffing it because I think that that allows the legs to hang in a cute floppy way. So I don't put stuffing all the way up right here to kind of the top of the leg. I stop maybe a couple inches before that. Then I just check both of my legs to make sure they're feeling similar. And when you're happy with the level of stuffing your legs have, we're going to join them together and create the base of the body. So we've got our second leg, the one that we finished second, which should still be attached to your working yarn. And then we've got the first one, and that's the one that we fastened off. So because I'm right-handed, I'm gonna put my working yarn leg over here on my right hand. If you're left-handed, you're just gonna switch this around so that you're working like this. Because we're going to go across the top of these legs, flattening them out and joining them as we work. We have 16 stitches around the leg, so if you divide that in half, we're going to work 8 single crochets to seam up our leg. To get that started, we're going to insert our hook in the first stitch of the round and then the last stitch of the round. So you gotta move your working yarn. This one's a little fiddly. Once you have 2 loops on your hook, I would tighten them down enough that that first loop isn't super loose. Mine's looking pretty loose, so I'm gonna take out the stitch marker. Just give it a little more room, and then even rotate it like this. We don't want that one. There we go. I've got this loop tightened down. And now I can complete that single crochet. So we've got that established. I'm just gonna mark this stitch for myself. Again, with this fuzzy yarn, you can never be too kind to your future self that's trying to make sense of what's going on in these stitches. So we've placed 1 single crochet to join those first and last stitch together. Now we're gonna work under the next stitch and the second to last stitch. Single crochet, so we've got 2, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we should be at the end of the leg here working our 8th stitch. So we've got 8 single crochets going across. Next, we're going to chain 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is going to create a little bit of separation between the legs. And then I'm going to grab my next leg. I like to keep it just kind of in the same orientation as the other one. So I'm going to put my loose strand of yarn that I fastened off over here. And then I'm going to grab my first leg here. I like to orient it in the same way my other leg was. So that meant that the yarn where I fastened off on this one is over here on the right side. It's just not really that important, but it's something I like to do to keep it super even. Then I'm going to insert my hook in the first stitch of this leg and the last stitch. So just like we did on that second leg that we joined first, I want to pull on that yarn I fastened off, and then I'm going to use my current working yarn to pull a loop through and complete my first single crochet. So what we've got here is 8 single crochets across the top of this second leg, and then we've got 4 chains, 1 single crochet to start pressing this leg together and joining it, and then I'm going to work a second one in the next 2 stitches. I'm realizing here I've got this piece of yarn out, so I'm going to trim it a bit and tuck it inside my leg so that I don't have to weave it in later. And then continue in single crochet across. So you've got 1, 2, and then we want to do 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and our 8th stitch should join those last 2 leg stitches. I think this is kind of the most tedious part of the whole pattern. So if you're at this point, you just made it through, smooth sailing from here. So we should now have 8 stitches here, 4 stitches here, and another 8 stitches here. Now I'm going to work around this entire body, working in the front loop, the loop that's closest to me, to establish the first round of our body. To do that, I'm just gonna flip this project over so that the loop is on the side of my dominant hand. If you're left-handed, you're gonna go like this. Right-handed, you're gonna go like this. And I'm just gonna leave my stitch marker right here for another second so that I can just notice when I'm at the end of the round. Again, if you're not using fuzzy yarn, a lot of this becomes unnecessary, but we want all the help we can get with this fuzzy yarn. So from here, we're going to work, like I said, in the front loop of each of our single crochets across the leg. Naturally, that's a little hard to see, so I want to point it out here. We've got that row of V's going across the top, and you can see right here, I've got a loop in the front here, a loop here, a loop here. So that's what I'm going to be working in as I cross this leg. The first one takes a little bit of finessing because you have to just work so close to where your active loop is. I'm just going to go through that first loop, the one that's on the side closest to me, and then pull my yarn through. It is twisting around a little bit, but that's okay. And now I've got my first single crochet. So I'm gonna put a stitch marker in here and remind myself that's the beginning of my round. So you can see I'm using a different color than the stitch marker at the end of my row from last time. And now we're gonna put a single crochet in each of these front loops. And one thing I just want to say one more time is to give you permission, if you can't see anything that's happening in this yarn, just do your best. Insert your hook in one of these front loops, put a single crochet in there. Your goal at the end of this side of your animal is to have 20 single crochets. So in an ideal world, we would accomplish that by putting 8 single crochets across this leg, and then 4 single crochets into our chain, and then another 8 across the leg. But if you don't get that spaced perfectly, the fuzzy yarn is going to hide a multitude of sins. So we're just going to get those stitches established. I've got 8 going across my leg. Now I'm just going to work into the loop of the chain that's closest to me. That's a little harder to sort of discern what's closest to you. So just pick a loop and single crochet 4 times into your chain. I've got 2, 3, and 4. This fuzzy yarn is hard to work with, but it sure does hide everything. So we're just aiming for good enough here just to get across this side. So now I'm working into this other leg. I'm going to once again work through the front loops only and place 8 single crochets as I work toward that stitch marker that indicates where I started my joining row. And then in my last stitch over here, I'm going to look for my little V, work through the front loop only of it, and place my last single crochet of the side. So it's a good time now to pause and count and just make sure that you have 20 single crochet going across your legs. And if you do, we're now going to rotate this, and we're going to work into the loop that we didn't work into before. So again, it's front loop because it's the one that's facing you. And it looks a little different now because it's kind of disguised by our established single crochets. So now that loop is pushed a little lower. I can see mine right here. Here's the single crochets from the opposite side of my animal. And then I've got my loop here, a loop here, a loop here. So we're going to pick those up and single crochet into each of those. And I like to put another stitch marker here at the end just because then it'll make it easier for me to count. So then when I want to count my 20 stitches from this side, I don't have to actually count from where I started this round, I just have to count from right here. So it's just a little lazy trick I'm going to use. And that's going to indicate my first stitch right here. And then I'm going to put 7 more single crochets across, working in those front loops. When those 8 stitches are complete, we want to work into the base of our chains. I realize this is impossible to see. So what you're trying to do is just insert your hook toward the bottom of the chain here, rather than up here where you already did these single crochets. So we're trying to work down here. That's going to establish our round evenly with what we did on the other side of the animal. So I'm just knowing I got to get 4 single crochets in here. We're flying blind, but it's okay. It's going to be the most adorable little creature either way. So we've got 2, 3, and 4. All right, now we're going to work 8 more single crochets across this leg. Once again, that front loop is down a little lower. You can see it's right here, just like it was on the other leg. So we're going to pick those loops up and single crochet in each of them. And then at the end of that leg, you want to go back and count your stitches, counting from that marker that you just put at the start of the side. So to be totally honest, I did this off camera and I only had 19 stitches. So I tore out this leg, identified that I didn't have enough stitches in this section, and just popped another one in, kind of randomly placed, and put 8 across. So I'm winging it as far as seeing in this yarn just as much as you, but the main point here is we should have 40 stitches going around the body at this point, and it gets a lot easier because now we're going to work in the round and we have sort of typical single crochet stitches established. You can remove that marker that indicated the beginning of the side. We're just going to maintain a stitch marker at the beginning of the round and then move it up as we work. And now, after that effort, which good job if you made it to this point, we're going to reward ourselves with several rounds of just basic single crochet. So just like we did in the legs, we're just cruising around in single crochet, working into every stitch. Your very first stitch to work into here might be a little twisty just by the nature of how we established this round. So just put your hook in it wherever you can, even if you're only picking up one loop. I think that's what I'm gonna do here. No, I got 2 loops, all right. You can see though, the yarn hides it all. So we just need to kind of maintain approximately the right stitch count. That's what's gonna create the shape that you expect. So I've got my first stitch marked now, and I'm just going across. Now I'm working under both loops of my single crochet, just like I typically would. We just did that front loop thing to establish the body, and now we're just gonna single crochet in every stitch, working around and around and around and around until we have 15 total rounds in this body. So let's work on that. Reward yourself for the hard work of joining your legs together, and we'll meet back here and talk about how to shape the body. And after you've just worked in those regular rounds for a while, you should have something that looks like this. It's a great time to count your stitches going around and verify that you have 40. If you've missed one along the way, which is easy to do in this fuzzy yarn, don't sweat it. Please don't tear it back and start again, because you can just omit one of the decreases as we're coming up on the next round, and that'll give you the right number of stitches. So let's say you're off by 1, just skip 1 decrease. If you're off by 2, skip 2 decreases, that sort of thing, because the main idea here is to taper the body in toward the head. And if you're off by a stitch or 2, you can still taper, you'll just modify your decreases slightly. Now, the other thing we need to do is make sure we have 15 rounds in the body. So I'm gonna show you how I'm counting those. I'm starting at this base here where we worked into the foundation chain, and then I've got 1. I'm counting kind of the lines between the rows. So this is my first row here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. You can just barely see those little lines. That indicates each round, so we know we're on track. And the other way to check this, if you're struggling to count the number of rounds, is just to measure. If you're using the same yarn as me, you should be around 3.5 inches for the body. So something like that is just fine. That'll maintain the correct proportions. And now we're gonna talk about how to decrease to taper toward the head. In round 16, we're going to decrease 4 times. Again, if you are maybe 1 stitch short, you have 39 stitches, then only decrease 3 times. That'll be fine too. Just work the first 3 decreases and then crochet till the end of the round. You can kind of make this up and no one will ever be able to tell in your fuzzy yarn. So I'm going to remove my stitch marker because we're going to decrease right away in my first 2 stitches. And this is the same invisible decrease that we use on the ears. So that involves going under the first loop here, the loop of my first stitch, the front loop, and then immediately under the front loop of my second stitch. So I'm picking both those up. Then I like to mark right here so I know where my next stitch is. This is only because we're using such fuzzy yarn. So that just helps me know and be able to identify what stitch hasn't been worked in yet. Then I'm going to yarn over and pull up my loop, and then yarn over and pull through to complete my single crochet, and that finishes up my decrease. We've combined 2 stitches into 1. Now my decrease is complete and I want to single crochet in the next 8 stitches. So I am going to work 1 right there, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Now we're ready to do that repeat all over again. So that starts with our decrease. Again, I'm picking up the front loop of my first stitch, then immediately going into the front loop of my second stitch, yarning over and pulling through those 2 loops. So now I have 2 loops on my hook, and then I like to mark my next stitch just so I know what's going on. There we go. And then yarn over and pull through. So that completes our second decrease. We've now eliminated 2 stitches. Once again, I'm going to single crochet in each of the next 8 stitches, and then I would repeat what I just did twice more. So we want to have 4 total decreases. Everything else is single crochet. And then we should end this round with 36 total stitches. Now I've arrived at the end of the round, and I know that because I've been counting, but I made a mistake here and I did not put my stitch marker in the top of that first decrease we did together. So that was a whoopsie, and I can see it clearly enough to know that it's right there, but don't follow me in that, because you always want to have that little stop sign so you just can double check that you're ending your round in the right spot. All right, now we're going to proceed with several more rounds where we're doing this exact same thing and we're decreasing 4 times in the round. So with each subsequent round, we're going to be working 1 fewer stitches between the decreases. So we just did 8 single crochet between each decrease. Now we're going to do 7 single crochet between each decrease. So that just looks like exactly what we did, just a slightly different number of stitches. Again, I'm taking out my stitch marker for a minute. I'm going to pick up the front loop of my first stitch, the front loop of my second stitch. Once you get the hang of this, if you don't find it necessary to mark your next stitch just to help yourself, you don't have to do that. That's just what I like to do, and it's helpful on camera to illustrate my point when the yarn's so fuzzy. But you can bypass that if you're feeling confident about counting your stitches. All right, pulling my loop up, now I have 2 on my hook, and then I can yarn over and complete that decrease. And this time, I'm going to put that stitch marker back in, so I know that that's my first stitch of the round. We've decreased. Now we're going to work 7 single crochets right here, and then decrease again, and then repeat that 2 more times. So a decrease, 7 single crochets, a decrease, 7 single crochets. We're doing that 4 times total around the body. At the end of round 17, we should have 32 stitches, and we're just going to proceed like this. Like I mentioned, we're just decreasing and then working a certain number of single crochets. Each round is going to eliminate 1 single crochet from that repeat. So now on round 18, we would decrease, work 6 single crochets, decrease 6 single crochets, and repeat that 4 times total around the body. We're going to just continue in this pattern. You can see the instructions are quite easy to read in the written pattern because it's just a slight variation on the same round. We're going to do that through round 21, and in round 21 we should have a total of 16 stitches left because we will have gotten rid of the rest through our decreases. So let's work on that, and we'll come back here to finish up the body and stuff it into a cute squishy little animal. When you finish round 21, your body should be looking something like this. And I just want to call out, if you're planning to use weighted pellets like I am to fill in the bottom of the body, I might stop at round 20 just so you have a little bit bigger of a hole, stuff your body, and then move on and proceed with rounds 21 through 23. But here I am, I finished round 21, so we're just gonna stretch this out a little bit. I've put 4 tablespoons of poly pellets in here, and I know I can get it in, it's just not quite as easy as I left myself a little bit more of an opening. So I'm gonna put that in first, and I get it situated in the base here. That's gonna help my little guy sit up a little bit better and just feel so squishy and lovey. And now I'm going to add some stuffing in there. I like to go for more of a floppy body, so I'm not overstuffing it, but there needs to be something in there to squeeze. So I'm filling this body up like this, and squishing as I go to check out when to stop. When you're happy with the stuffing, we're gonna proceed with the final rounds. So if you did stop at round 20, you're gonna continue with round 21, but if you stopped where I did, which was after round 21, we're moving on now to round 22. And this one is just a decrease and then single crochet in the next 2 stitches. So it's very similar to what we've been doing. We're just really trying to close things up now. So that looks like pick up the front loop of my first stitch, pick up the front loop of my second stitch, yarn over and pull through, complete that single crochet. At this point, you might be getting pretty good at identifying the next stitch to work into without placing a needle there. So if not, keep using that little trick with the needle. I'm just single crocheting in my next stitch, single crocheting one more time for a total of 2 single crochets, and then we're going to decrease again. 1, 2 loops, yarn over, pull through, complete that single crochet decrease, and then single crochet and single crochet. All this way in, and the stitches are still a little bit hard to see. So we're going to continue like this around, decrease, then single crochet in the next 2 stitches, decrease, single crochet in the next 2 stitches 4 total times. And then at the end of round 22, your body is complete. So we want to fasten off, leaving a long yarn tail, maybe 20 or 25 inches, that we can use later to attach the head to the body. For our bunny tails, I like to use these cute little fur pom-poms that are available in bulk, really inexpensively on Amazon. I'll put the link below. But you can also crochet a tail, and to do that, you're just going to begin with the same 2 rounds that we've started everything else with. Those first round of 6 single crochet, second round of all increasing. So you've got 12 single crochet. And then we're gonna do the third round is just like we did in the head, where we put 2 stitches in the first stitch, so we're increasing just like that, placing our marker back in that first stitch we just worked, and then working a single crochet in the next stitch and an increase next stitch. Essentially, we're just alternating an increase and then a single crochet, increase and single crochet all the way around our circle. Then when that round is complete, we're going to just single crochet in each stitch for round 4. This is very similar to what we did for the head. We're basically just making a very mini head that we're going to attach to the booty of your bunny. So that is a single crochet in each stitch all the way around for round 4. Round 5 is exactly the same thing, single crochet in each stitch around. At the end of round 5, you should have something that looks a little bit like a bowl here. So we are going to start decreasing, which is exactly what we did in the head. The next 3 rounds of our tail are identical to the last 3 rounds of the head. So I'm not going to show them in detail, but the main idea here is to work a decrease. So that's first stitch, second stitch, decrease, just like that. Replace my stitch marker there. Single crochet in the next stitch, decrease, single crochet in the next stitch. We're going to repeat that 6 times around. After round 6, it's a great time to put a little stuffing in your little tail bowl here. You've got your yarn tail from your magic ring, so you can tuck that into. Just a little stuffing will do. And now in round 7, we're going to just decrease all the way around. So that's just a decrease, decrease in the next stitch, just like that, around your circle 6 total times. When that is complete, we're going to fasten off, leaving a little bit of a yarn tail to sew this bunny tail to the back of the body. And when you've produced all of your bunny body parts, it's time to join them together. This is the part I find the most stressful, but I just want to remind all of us, including myself, that you can always take this out if you don't like how one attachment looks. Take it out and try again, because it's definitely worth getting right. The first parts we're going to join here are our ears, and luckily we've already given ourselves clues about where we want them because we have these stitch markers. And we're going to place our ears right above them. We want to do it right above where that indent is from our head shaping. And hopefully you have a long yarn tail left over on your ears. We're going to thread our tapestry needle with that. And then I'm going to look for the part of my ear that is just a little taller. Because of working in a spiral, one side's going to look a little taller, and I'm going to be placing the taller side a little higher up. I'm going to be placing that on the outside. That is just one way to do it though. If you look at your ear and you're like, oh, it's just so cute how it's curving, I want it to go this way, that's fine too. This is just like one way to think about it. But the main idea here is we want to place our ear right above where we have our indent and our stitch marker. And in this bunny example, there's about 11 stitches from right here at the front of the ear around in that same round to right over here. About 11 stitches. But honestly, rather than trying to count those, they're really hard to see. I would really suggest just putting your ears on here right above the stitch markers and looking for a placement that you're happy with. Just like that. Just eyeball it. That's really the name of the game with this fuzzy yarn if you haven't picked up on that by now. Okay, so I'm gonna place my ear right there, right over my indent. Kind of move it around until I'm happy with how that placement's looking. And I have my ears pointed ever so slightly forward toward the face. So that's a consideration to make too. I think that looks cute, but of course you can do it however you want. All right, so I've got my ear situated. I don't pin it here because I find it easier to just go ahead and sew than try to move it around with a stitch marker, but you can definitely pin it if that feels easier to you. And now we're going to whip stitch the ear in place. I'm going back through the ear right now so I can get a really good grip. And we're going just through the head and gently picking up stitches of the ear, just going around and around like this. If you have a different method of seaming, a different stitch you like to use, go for that. There's no wrong or right way to do this necessarily. We're just trying to get it securely attached and go for an adorable result. And you're going to continue like this across the ear. Now, in the interest of full transparency, I want you to know I sewed that one on camera. I looked at it and was like, no, that's not it. So I definitely redo this from time to time, or quite often actually, if I don't get the look that I want on the first try. But now I feel like this is looking pretty good, and I want to point out something down here you might be running into. You may see that your ear is open on the bottom because you were kind of grabbing the upper stitches to sew it on there. So I like to just pick up a few stitches here, partly to close the ear and partly just to make sure it's a little bit more securely attached. And this part underneath is really not going to be visible, so this doesn't totally matter how it looks, but it does make your ear attached a little more firmly. And then when we're done attaching like that, then we can just weave in our yarn tail right down here, save all the less than pretty stuff for underneath the ear where it probably will never be seen. Now we're going to repeat that same process again, but we obviously have one ear to reference, so we want to look for some symmetry in how we're placing our second ear. You're just trying to be aware of what round you actually joined the ear in, and then how much of an angle it's at pointing forward. Of course, a little bit of asymmetry can always be cute in all of us. I'm not claiming perfect symmetry on my own face, but once you've got that in place, you're just going to repeat the exact same steps to seam that second ear to your head. All right, adorbs. We've got our ears attached. Our next step is to attach the head to the body, and that means that we need to tuck all of these knots and any tails we have from before inside this neck hole. So you might have to open the hole up a little bit. Doesn't really matter how you do this. The main idea is just to get them inside there. We're going to seal this up by sewing around the neck here to attach the head. So we want to make sure our head is on straight, that the nose is kind of going right down here between the legs. Everything looks lined up like that. And then we should have a really long tail left over from our body. And we're going to use our tapestry needle and that yarn tail to attach the head. My yarn tail is maybe even too long, so I'm going to trim it a little bit. And just like with the ears, you can definitely pin this together if that feels more secure as you're stitching. I find it a little bit easier just to kind of grip it together, and be open to the fact that if this does not work out well the first time, just tear it out and try again. It's pretty low stakes. We are going to be whip stitching from under the chin, a couple rounds out from our end of the head here, like where the knot is. We're going to whip stitch from that to a couple rounds into the body. So I realize that's not a precise measurement, but you can't really see the rounds anyhow. So what we're going for here is to get the head, have enough surface area on the neck that it feels stable. Like we want it to not feel like it's just dangling at the very top of the neck, but we do want it to stay floppy. So we're also not trying to press it so far down, seem like here, like we're, I don't know, pressing two hamburger buns together. So you use this as your visual reference here. just like that. It's got a cute little bit of flop. And then we're gonna just start our whip stitches like this, picking up a stitch in the sort of chin region and then going over here to a stitch in the neck area. We're kind of whip stitching like that, going up here back to the chin, back down here to the neck, rotating as we go. You want to keep these stitches fairly close together. Like I wouldn't use, 5 total stitches to complete this seam because you want the whole head to feel really securely attached to the body. All right, you're gonna see what I'm doing here. I'm just gonna go just like this, repeating all the way around the neck until my head is completely attached. When you've made it all the way around, it's worth it to just turn it around, make sure there's no gaps, any holes, anything like that would make it less secure. And then we can weave in this end because we have got the very strong start of a bunny here. One thing that I think it's worth mentioning is that these projects are hard to work in fuzzy yarn because, gosh, we all know at this point it's hard to see your stitches. But for the same reason, you don't have to be as precise with your seaming because it's also really hard to see if you've done a shoddy job of seaming. You can get away with doing it in a little bit messier way than you would with other yarn. So I just like to point out, there's some pros and some cons of this. The biggest pro, I think, is that it creates an adorably sweet fuzzy animal at the end. The first step with our arms is just to add a little bit of stuffing in there. You can definitely put some weight down at the bottom if you want. I'm not doing that on this one, but I am going to get a little bit of stuffing in there. Again, I'm not going for a really overstuffed feel, so I'm just putting a little bit in. They have a little bit of structure because this yarn becomes just a little bit stiff when the stitches are worked tightly. So I don't actually need that much stuffing. I kind of want to make sure it's spread out along the entire tube. And when those are feeling even, we're ready to attach them to the body. So I'm gonna be using these leftover yarn tails that we saved for ourselves. I left myself a super long one, so I'm gonna cut it off just a little bit. And then I wanna thread my tapestry needle with that arm yarn tail. And as far as arm placement goes, we want them to be attached just under where the head joins the body. So I've got maybe a round or 2 here before my arm is attached. And I like them to be a little bit toward the front of the body. So you can see, if you look overhead, this is just a little bit forward. So I like to place a stitch marker where I anticipate putting the arms, because just like with the ears, it just gives me a little bit of guidance. So I'm going to mark an approximate spot on one side and then do the same thing on the other side. Again, I'm putting them just a little bit forward and I'm trying to make sure that my markers are in the same round. So it's obviously, we don't know exactly what round we're in now because we can't see the top of the body, but I want to be able to trace this round and see it's actually not quite for me. So I'm going to correct it just a little bit, make sure that we're working into the same round. That'll create arms of even height. And then now I want to take a look at this placement, put my arms there and see if I like how that's looking. And like I've mentioned, it's worth moving these around to make sure that you really like the placement that you've got, that it feels symmetrical. And when you're happy with it, it's time to use that yarn tail that we've left over from before, thread your tapestry needle. And on this step, we're actually going to flatten the arm before we join it to the body. So that just entails whip stitching, just like this, across the top of the arm, using your existing yarn tail. A little bit of a bump going there. We're just working through each stitch that you're able to see to close this arm up and make it look similarly flat to the top of the legs where they're attached to the body. Now, when that step is complete, don't fasten off because we're going to use the same strand of yarn to attach the arm to the body. And I'm placing my arm right here where I've got my stitch marker. I'm going to essentially try to place the top edge of my arm right where my stitch marker is. So I might need to remove it in order to be able to access those stitches. I'll look one more time, make sure I like that placement. And then just like we did with the ear, we're going to whip stitch through the body, into the arm, around the stitch marker, over the river and through the woods to the other side of the arm. And then we're gonna check on the underneath seam here, but first I like to just make sure that I like the placement, that I don't want to take it out in any way. I think this is looking pretty good. So we're now going to work kind of along the underside if you weren't able to really securely attach the arm on both parts of this. Like the ear, this isn't going to be super visible, especially with this yarn. So I'm going to take another pass of whip stitching through the underarm here, just pick up my stitches. It's really not visible in this furry yarn. So I'm just double checking to make sure that this arm is securely attached. And when you make it to the other side, kind of where your seam originally started on the top of the arm, you can weave in your yarn tail. And we've got one more limb to go. You're going to repeat the same process with the second arm, doing the exact same thing on the upper part of the arm and below the arm to securely attach this arm to your bunny. We've got one last step, and that is to attach our tail. So as I mentioned before, I love these little fur pom-poms. You can get them on Amazon. That's a really cute way to add a tail, but if you crocheted yours, you're going to use your yarn tail and your tapestry needle to just whip stitch it right down here. I like to put it in around, I don't know, 3 or 4, somewhere around there, right in the middle. And then we want to make sure as we're whip stitching it to the body that we're picking up all the edges of the tail so that none of that stuffing that's inside can come out. So we just want to basically securely attach it. Of all the complex seaming we've done at this point, this one should feel the easiest. You're just trying to sew it on there so it doesn't fall off. When you've made sure you're happy with the placement, just weave that yarn tail in, and your bunny is now complete. Please be sure to tag us if you share photos on social media, and come on over to our free private crochet community where we chat all things yarn and answer any pattern questions you have. And don't forget to subscribe because the rest of the Storybook collection is equally as charming as this project and uses a lot of the same skills. Happy crocheting!